All right, well, we're in the shop today with the C6 Corvette competition drift build, and it is time for some upgrades on this thing. As much as this car is done and has been done, if you've ever had really any car build, but especially a race car that's getting thrashed week in and week out, A, they always need work. B, there's always room for improvement. You're always upgrading things, and that is exactly what we're doing. We've got a bunch of exciting upgrades for this thing, and obviously the usual stuff. So in 2 weeks, we have really our biggest event of the year and really our last chance to get a good result in competition in this thing against some heavy hitters. It is the Riverside 50K up in Indiana. So it's 25,000 for first, I think 10 for second, and so on. Brings out a ton of FD drivers, ton of pro level drivers, ton of talent. So this is a really important one for us. We drove this same event last year. You can see the door card on the LS Miata there, that's from that event. And we fared reasonably well. We made it to the top 16. We had to battle Travis Reeder in his pro car on pro tires, and he had actually just won the FD round right before that. So obviously, tough competitor. We put up a good fight, but we just didn't have enough for him. And I mean, that's really the reason we built this car and what this car is for, so we'll always have enough for anybody that we have to go against. But to have enough, we gotta make sure the car's in tip-top shape, and we got to find little performance advantages when and where we can. So the first thing we're going to tackle is the clutch. So we bought this thing as an unfinished project. If you followed along, you know it's not even the same car anymore. We intended on just finishing it. We changed everything. I mean, we even changed the entire chassis, but we did use a lot of the parts that came with it, and this clutch was one of those things. It's a fancy, expensive clutch, but I've never been very fond of it. It's not really the right setup for a drift car because of the way you drive drift cars, especially a high competition level with big tires and all that. But it's also just not really the right clutch for this engine combination. A turbo LS that we're not revving to the moon and stringing out. It just has never really been the right clutch for this car, but it's worked good enough, so we've left it. But it's toast. It is gone. It started slipping at the last competition we did, which was another Riverside 50K up in Jersey. It started slipping during comp, and then we did a test day after comp, and it took its last breath. I mean, it would not hold any power. Even on the skid pad, put it in third, and it would just blow right through the clutch. So the bad news is the clutch is toast. The good news is that means we finally have an excuse to tear the car apart and put a much better clutch setup in it that should work way better for what we're doing. The car should be a lot better to drive and significantly more competitive if my thoughts and theories are right. So we'll get into the how and why of that later. But that's our first project. We need to get this thing torn apart and put a different clutch setup in it. So I need to quit jibber jabbering about it, and we need to get into it. So on this car, everything in the exhaust is solid mounted. It's a race car. The engine's solid mounted, the exhaust is all solid mounted, the turbo's solid mounted. So that means there is no flex and give like you would have on a normal car, which means we've got to remove some stuff to be able to tilt the engine back, which we have to do in order to remove the transmission. So I pull the cold side out and I pull a Y pipe off, and then we're good to go on tilting the engine back. Josue goes ahead and gets the shifter plate knocked out of the way. That way we have some room to pull the transmission back before we drop it down. And then it's time to remove the downpipe in the middle portion of the exhaust. Now, I wanted to make this more serviceable. That was the goal, but there's always sacrifices that you got to make. And the only way to get the first portion of the exhaust in was to put the V-band a little further forward, which means it's a little bit difficult to get to. Now, that is one struggle when it comes to race cars that a lot of people don't realize, is that there's always sacrifices somewhere. It's all about compromises. You've got to determine where you want to make those compromises. Sometimes you'll sacrifice performance for serviceability or serviceability for performance, but you got to make those choices on your own and try to come up with the best compromise for you. So that was our compromise there, but we got the exhaust out of the way so we can get the drive shaft out of the way. Then we can support the transmission, pull the transmission mount. I've already loosened the engine mounts. So now all we need to do is tilt the engine back, let the transmission drop down a little bit, and then we've got 4 bell housing bolts to remove. One of them is an Allen, and that's just because it's in a tight spot and you wouldn't be able to get a socket on it. And the other 3 are hex heads. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We get those loosened out and the transmission pops right out, which I didn't catch on camera because my camera timed out. Sorry. All right, transmission is out. I don't think the camera recorded it. You can see all the clutch material in there. That thing is smoked. I'm real curious to see what it looks like when we get it apart, but that went pretty smooth. Really happy with that. You know, we tried to design as much serviceability into this setup as possible. And the last time we did this, you know, we weren't sure what all we had to take out and remove. So it took us a little while, but this time it probably took 30, 45 minutes maybe at a very leisurely pace. Came right out, no problems, no drama, no struggles, just boom, boom. So here's our transmission. So we just put this one in a month or so ago before the Riverside 50K, because we haven't had a chance to go through our transmission, and this is our spare. What's next is to pull the bell housing. Now, we haven't done that in the car. We've pulled the transmission out in the car, but we've never pulled the bell housing out in the car. It might be a little tricky, so should probably quit jibber jabbering and get this taken apart. I'm real curious to see what this clutch looks like, because I think it's been on its way out for a while, and we definitely sent it out in style. So there's bound to be some carnage. So Josue and I started working on removing the bell housing. As I said, we haven't done this before. If you've ever worked on a car, any sort of car project, stock car, race car, anything, you know that one side, once you do something once, it becomes a lot quicker the second time. Once you have that kind of combination of tools you need to get to each bolt and what you need to remove or loosen, and we got a lot of lines that run up right next to the bell housing, so we had to pop the P-clamps for those loose and just do a couple of odds and ends to get to and access every single bolt. So Josue got all of the bolts removed, or so we thought, and we got ready to pull the bell housing out. So we started working on it, and if something ever doesn't want to come out, it's almost always that there's a bolt there, and there was a bolt there. So we got that one out, and then it came right off.
Look at that. Beautiful work.
Dude, these discs are so much thinner than they were. That's wild. They're like an 1/8 inch thick right now. They were like probably 1/4 inch thick at first. All right, so before I pull the clutch off, give you guys a look at it. You can see all the bluing on the hub. Definitely got hot, got real hot. You can see, it's hard to see the difference. So these are the disc here, these are floater plates, but the discs were about the thickness of the floater plates before, and you can see how thin they are now. This thing is completely worn down. Pretty wild. You can see all the clutch material back there on the block and such. So yeah, I just need to get this thing yanked off. I'm very excited to change this up. I remember when we first test drove the car, I was like, we might have to pull this thing right back apart and change this clutch out. But I got used to it over time, but it's not optimal. But we'll get into that in a minute. We got to finish taking it apart. So time to get back to work. Yeah.
Dude, that last shift.
Dude, it's wild.
Oh my goodness. Impressive.
Dude, that's wild. Literally wore that thing down to paper thin. That's unacceptable.
It was right where you left it. In the. Let's go.
Oh no. Oh, it's the socket split, I think.
Let's go. Crisis averted.
This is why I don't Loctite shit, bro. That is exactly why I don't Loctite stuff. I have been Loctiting everything lately. Now I'm like, why did I do this to myself? Here we go.
I was like, oh.
I don't know if you can see how thin that is, but I mean, basically the clutch material is gone all the way down to the frame of the disc. I mean, pretty impressive that it worked, you know, up until that point when it didn't. It worked until it didn't. Because I mean, it started slipping in Jersey, and it still did it was definitely slipping through the whole 50K. Because I think that's what my crazy wheel hop feeling was the clutch would slip and then grab, and then it would just like shake the tires.
It's crazy how small the disc.
It's tiny. So yeah, this was a quad disc clutch. This is what we had, we used it. So one of the things I liked is that you can buy replacement disc pack, floater packs, but then when the time came when we put this transmission in before the 50K, they were back ordered with not really any good ETA. So I ended up not doing it. My plan was to put this transmission in and refresh this clutch. And I was pretty spot on with my timing because it started to slip for sure during that competition. We made it through the competition, but it was slipping, throughout the whole thing. So I had the timing right on when we needed to rebuild it. I just couldn't get the parts at the time. So we're changing it up, changing the setup. But it won't be here till tomorrow with our special guest. So we want to just get everything taken apart tonight. That way, when he gets here, we can hopefully just slam this thing back together with the new setup. All right, Alberto is here, and we have our new clutch.
Oh, you just rolled it off.
Oh, I didn't see it. Oh yeah, that's a nice rig. All right, here's our new clutch from ACT, and here is our old clutch. Now you can see right off the bat, there is a massive size difference. So this is a 7 1/4 quad disc clutch. And this is a good clutch for certain types of racing, drag racing, road racing, but for drifting, it's really not the most ideal setup. And that's part of why I wanted to get rid of it originally, but here we are. We used it, we tried it, we definitely worked through the bugs with it, and still it's time to change it up. So there's a few differences here. Technically, the full-size clutch has a larger surface area and much better heat dissipation. You can see they've even got fins built in to dissipate the heat, which is a big problem in drifting. The clutches get hot. You use the clutch a lot as a tool while you're in drift, on the run-up, all of those things. So heat dissipation is huge, and heat is what killed our previous clutch. It just got too hot and couldn't handle and dissipate that heat. Now, past the functionality aspect, this clutch should hold up a lot longer in the environment it's in this car. But the drivability is the biggest reason for this change, and the biggest reason I wanted to get rid of this clutch after the first test drive. With this being that we have a larger surface area, we're able to use a ceramic metallic pad material. This is a sintered iron pad material. Now you couple that with the fact that this setup has more weight, thus more inertia. This setup is very light and has virtually no inertia. This is a very, very hard clutch to drive. It is very, very difficult to slip this clutch and get the car off the line. And that was a big problem in this car, because in drift competitions, before the drifting starts, it is a drag race. And that drag race is equally as important as everything else that happens in the run, because if you lose the drag race, you're gonna have a hard time winning the battle. So getting the car off the line and having that consistency is key. So I went with a longer first gear so that you have more time to pace the lead driver. I found that really helped in the Miata if I started off in second gear, for example. The problem is with this clutch being a small diameter, low inertia, sintered iron disc, it's really an on-off switch. So I could not get the car to leave the line without spinning the tires, which meant the car was slow off the line. Not a huge problem in the lead. I don't mind. I'm not trying to run away from anybody, but in the chase, I would get left sometimes. And for what this car is, it's got a ton of power. It's got a big tire. It should be quick off the line, but that was the biggest thing holding us back. So what I'm getting at is this clutch, drivability-wise, should be a massive improvement. You wouldn't think something like a different style and setup of clutch would make that big of a difference, but at this level we're competing at, all of these little things make a big difference. That's why the Miata was as successful as it was. It's just we worked through all of those little things, found those little performance gains. And this, in my opinion, I think this is gonna be a huge performance gain. I'm really excited about this. Not to mention, everyone I know who runs them swears by them and would never run anything different. So I think this is really gonna be a good package for us. I'm excited. You got anything you wanna add before we take this thing apart, Alberto?
I swear to back up the quality of this product. It's gonna be amazing. It's gonna blow your tires away.
Blow your tires away.
Same way you have in a brake rotor on the inside, you have those vents in there as well to release all those gases through there. You have your chromoly flywheel, which is also SFI certified. So you just have 2 grooves, so you're able to, again, control that heat.
So we're gonna extend our dry brake disconnect line locations. Where they are now, they kind of got buried behind the coolant lines. It's one of those things when you're building a car, you try to account for everything, and we really did try with this car, but we didn't know we were gonna put the coolant lines there until after, and we made them hard to reach. So we're gonna make them easier to reach. When you make things not the most serviceable, You just got to rectify those mistakes whenever you got to take it apart, because you will inevitably have to take it apart. At least if it's a race car. You got to build it knowing you're going to take it apart multiple times. Right, Osway? So before we started putting the new clutch assembly on and putting everything back together in the car, Josue got to work on disconnecting our dry brakes and adding those kind of intermediary lines to bring them down. And I started working on changing our throwout bearing setup. So I needed to get the piston pressed to the release bearing and then get them swapped in. You can see the massive size difference. It's very important to have the right size throwout bearing face for whatever size clutch you run. So we're going from a tiny clutch that needed a tiny face to a large full-size clutch that needs a large full-size face. So I got that swapped in. Josue got the line swapped out, and then before we started putting the flywheel on, I went ahead and started working on chasing the threads. Since we had Loctite in there and those bolts were very difficult to get out, we want to make sure we get all that old stuff cleaned out so that we don't put new stuff on top of old stuff and make our lives more complicated down the road than they're already going to be, because we will inevitably have to take this thing back apart. So we worked the flywheel on. It's a tight fit with this aftermarket crank, and then I like to torque the flywheel bolts to 20 foot-pounds and then remove them one at a time, add Loctite, tighten them back to 20 foot-pounds, and then once all of them have Loctite, which we mark them to make sure that we get all of them, then go through and do the torque sequence to do the final torque to torque them down. We have to run Loctite as much as I don't want to, how much of a pain it was to get those off. It's a flywheel, a clutch assembly is spinning very fast and it's right by your legs, and we do have this QuickTime bell housing, which is meant to prevent it from going through the floorboard, but it's still very important that it does not come loose and does not have a chance of falling off. So as much as I don't want to, future me wants the serviceability of not having Loctite there, I know we got to do it. So same thing, once we get the clutch assembled, we get the pressure plate on, we get all the bolts started, I go by one, pull them out, and add the Loctite to them. Now, it's always important to check that your alignment tool goes in and out smoothly as you snug everything up. The alignment tool can be in there and the clutch not really be aligned. So we checked it. I was a little worried that it might not be all the way in, but it seems good. Seems like it's good to go. We'll find out. All right, there's our new clutch. That is a snazzy looking unit, I gotta say. If I do say so myself. Boom. All right, time to put the bell housing on, make sure that our hydraulic spacing is correct. It's very important if you're doing any sort of clutch aftermarket, especially with aftermarket throwout bearings and such. You can have a big problem if the throwout bearing is too far from the fingers, or if it's too close, because it can be too thick and then it's basically always pushing the fingers and your clutch will slip. So it's very important that we verify this is correct. If not, we'll have to make some changes to make sure that it all works correctly. This is definitely one of those things you can't just not do. So as I said, this is absolutely pertinent with an aftermarket clutch throwout bearing setup. It's crucial. I'm all for not doing things that people swear you absolutely have to do, but this is something you have to do, because if it's wrong either direction, your clutch isn't going to work correctly. And you're probably not going to find out until you're at the track, and you're going to not be happy. You're not going to be having fun. So we go to throw the transmission in, and when we put this in last time, I mean, it fell right into place. It was the easiest transmission install I've ever done. And this time, it was fighting us, and my fears were kind of confirmed. I don't think the alignment tool was all the way into the pilot bearing, so it's not lined up. Now, fortunately, the throwout bearing is inside the bell housing. So what we did was I got in the car, we lifted it up, Alberto and Josue went ahead and put the transmission into place. I pushed the clutch, which then released the disc, and we were able to use the transmission to basically line them up and pop everything in, and it went in nicely. You never want to force it. You never want to have to tighten a transmission into place. Sometimes you kind of do, but be careful. It's very important, because if not, you will tear things up if things aren't aligned correctly. So we got the transmission back in, transmission mount back on, engine mounts tightened down, drive shaft back in, and now it's time for this pesky exhaust. This is something that bugs me every time we work on it, because I was so excited to make this super serviceable so we could easily drop this section of exhaust at the track, and there was just no way to do it with the routing that we had. It's one of those things, we got to accept it. So once everything was done underneath, we needed to drop the car down and move back up top. This wide pipe's been a bit of a fight the last couple times we've taken it off. This time I had a lock nut seize. I had to cut the locking portion off of it, but it just requires a lot of finagling and moving things around. The turbo is hard mounted to the chassis, so you've got to loosen that bracket and jiggle it around, and the downpipe to get all of these V-bands to line up with everything being solid. It takes everything being absolutely perfect. And as time goes on, this stuff heats up and contracts and expands and changes direction and shape, and it just gets more difficult to do, but we got it. All right, transmission is back in, drive shaft done, exhaust back on, Y pipe for the hot side back in, cold side back in, top side's back together, bottom side's back together. Next step is we need to readjust our clutch stop. So we've got this stud here, and what this does is prevents me from pushing the clutch pedal too far, right? So it's got to go far enough to disengage the clutch, but if it goes too far, you'll overstroke. You can either damage the throwout bearing, or you're also basically jamming the clutch against the crank, pushing it into the engine, you'll tear up your thrust bearing. So it's very important to have that set correctly. So that's what we're gonna do right now. You hear it there. Yep. It's honestly about where it needs to be. All right, we got this thing back together, back on the ground. As far as we know, we are ready to go. We're gonna go drive this thing around to make sure the clutch engages and disengages properly and everything seems good. We've still got some more work to do before we go test this thing out at an event before the competition. So yeah, always feels good to get this car back together, back on the ground. Every time we work on it, we learn more, we get more efficient. I'm Jibber Jabber, and let's go drive this thing, see how it feels. Like I can just like back out of the shop at idle like I could with the Miata.
Wow. Nice.
We need to adjust the stop a little bit more. It's like, it's a little too close. Okay. Like it's like right off the bottom, but already like night and day. Like it, wow. So what am I supposed to do? Like foot brake, left foot brake or whatever?
Just grind the clutch a little bit, that's it. That's exciting. Heck yeah.
Remember the power steering setting I changed? So that if it stalled for a split second, I just tested it and it worked. That's like the power steering stayed on.
Nice. So you didn't stall it on purpose?
No. Or I did stall it on purpose.
Yeah. That's what I meant. It sounds like you're taking off much smoother.
Oh, dude, it's so easy.
Smooth.
It's so easy now. This clutch has no business being able to handle this much power. Because it is so smooth. Wild. Yeah, no, like watch how easy I can take off. No problem.
Wow. That's already night and day difference.
Ready? Oh, it's going to be weird because it's kind of in the way. Completely no throttle, can take off.
Wow.
That was, both of those were no throttle at all.
No bucking, no nothing.
No nothing. Dude, I cannot wait to compete with this thing. Gosh, dang. Oh, it's going to be so much better. I'm so glad we get to test it. All right, let's pull it back in the shop. We can get it ready for the next 2 weekends.
Let's go.
All right, right, well, we've confirmed that the clutch works. It disengages fully. It seems to engage fully. We won't really know until we put it under a bunch of load, but it seems to be working as it should, which is super, super exciting in and of itself. But man, the difference, mind-blowing, absolutely insane. Drives so good and so smooth. I can't wait to see how that translates to competing and, you know, launching off the line and all of that stuff. And I'm excited to see how it holds up. Hopefully A1, it's all good there. That would really be the only caveat, you know? So stoked on that, glad we got that done. But that being said, we are going drifting this weekend to test the car out before Riverside, which is next weekend. So to do that, we need to prep the car. One of the things we need to do is replace our blower fans here. So we have these blower fans that basically blow cold air into the engine bay, displace the hot air out, and push it basically up out of the hood vents. At the last competition, we sucked a bunch of rubber up in there, because you can see there's all sorts of junk in here, and it locked the fan up. So then we couldn't use the fans, which then the engine bay temperatures got hotter. So this is a problem. I think this is, we've replaced at least one of these before, and now we're gonna be replacing another. But we don't wanna just replace them and have the same problem again. Now we could switch them and have them pull air out, which was my original plan. But A, we're gonna be sending super hot air through them. B, hot air rises, so it's better to put cooled air in to displace the hot air than try to get the hot air out, in my opinion. So what we're gonna do is we've got some new ones, and we've got this stainless steel screen that we're gonna put on here like a turbo guard to try to prevent it from sucking up huge chunks of rubber, because that's what happens. The little rubber strings coming off my car, coming off other people's cars, end up getting sucked into the fan blades, and then they lock the motor up, and then the motor tries to melt down, and it is a mess. So screen, boom. Hopefully they work a little better. The more air we can move through the engine bay, the cooler things will run and the happier everything will be. So, you ready, Josue? I think we can get that one with the fender on, but I think this one we're gonna have to pull the fender off.
Yeah, be all right. Get it done.
So while Josue started working on the removal process, I started working on getting the new ones ready. We need to get a matching connector on there to match up with our chassis harness plug, get some heat shrink loom on there, get it all shrunk up, just make them all nice and normal and a direct drop-in replacement for what we had. All right, Josue got the fender off on this side. You can see this is the problem child. This is the one that went out us at Riverside in Jersey. It is completely stuck. It is smoked. So we're gonna try to prevent that from happening again. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this, but the motor melted, literally melted. That is wild. Yeah, so when we replaced them last time, we used these same ones because they were cheap on Amazon. We knew they fit. Oh, these are way bigger. Wow. Well, hopefully it fits. Jeez. We've just broken so many of these, and I know it's from debris, but they seem pretty dinky. These seem beefy. So after taking a moment to appreciate the carnage, it was time to get back to work on wiring these new ones up. I'm running a little bit low on my connectors here, so I had to salvage the old connector off the old blower fan to use on one of the new ones. This is one of those things, I like to keep this stuff around. I like to have it just in stock, as I like to say. I'm not a store, but keep it in stock, keep it on hand. That way, when we have to do a project like this, it's one less thing to think about. I don't have to worry about ordering the connectors on top of ordering the blower fans and the screen. However, I've been slacking on ordering the stuff. I'm running low, and you don't realize how low you're running until you use it, and then you forget about it. So maybe this will remind me and I'll order some, but I got them both swapped on, new connectors, heat shrink loom, all that good stuff, and Josue started working on installing them. He got the driver's side done, got the fender back on, and then we started working on getting the passenger side one on. This one's easier to reach because you don't have to use the fender, but it's still a little bit tricky to get everything finagled up into place. So let's see how they sound. These move way more air. How's that one feel? This one feels gnarly. Oh, I forgot these are the thing too. Even the, yeah, right.
Even the engine's got AC. Old Betty needs AC.
Dude, that's wild. That's way better. This is why you can't ever trust what the internet says, because on Amazon, these are both 270 CFM rated. Those definitely didn't push anywhere near this much air. Not even close. All right, back to it. We gotta put the shifter back together. We're gonna do oil change, transmission fluid change, diff fluid change. We don't technically need to change the diff fluid, but we're switching to a different brand because the brand I was using got super expensive. It went from like $60 for 4 quarts to like $95 for 4 quarts, and it's something we use and change often. I've always been of the belief that you're better off with a slightly cheaper fluid, and I'm not saying dirt cheap, like still nice quality synthetic. We're going from Redline to Lucas and changing it more frequently. That's how I do my engine oil. I use Mobil One 1550. It's cheap at Walmart. It's like 25 bucks for 5 quarts. And we change it every event to 2 events. If it's 2 comps back to back, we'll change it. If it's a comp and a fun event, we won't. So like we'll change it now, and then we won't change it until after the competition, because we're not going to drive it that much this weekend. It's more of a test day. So jibber jabber, back to work. So we started working on buttoning up the finishing touches. Josue's working on getting the shifter plate back in, the handbrake back on, and I'm working on getting our headlight lens back into place. And then we went ahead and fired the engine up. I like to let it run for just a little bit before we change the oil, because with the dry sump, the oil can kind of make its way out of the tank, and you won't get as much out unless you're doing a full systems flush. So let it run, let it get just a tiny bit of temp in it, and then we can drain the oil. So Josue went ahead and drained the tank. It's so nice on this car. We can actually get to the tank without taking anything apart. And then we went ahead and moved on to the transmission and the differential, got all those fresh fluids changed. All right, well, the car is pretty well ready to go as far as we know. We've got fresh oil, filter, transmission fluid, diff fluid, all the fluids. All the fluids are good to go. New clutch. Fortunately, there is an OSW event tomorrow, so we have the opportunity to test the car out before we make the 1,000-mile trek north to go to Indiana for the Riverside 50K. I'm really excited about this event because there's a lot of heavy hitters coming, a lot of good friends. It should be a really good time, and this time, it's a track that we've driven before. The Riverside in Jersey, we'd never driven the track, so we're learning the track. We're still learning the car. We're getting better with the car. The clutch should make a difference. We're gonna align it, which we didn't do for a while, and we found out that the alignment was way off. And we checked it after Jersey, before the test day where the clutch finally said goodbye, and we had about 3/4 of an inch toe in the front. And we're not gonna let that happen again, right, Josue?
No, sir.
We're gonna remember.
We're gonna stay on top of it.
Yeah, we're pretty good about the maintenance, but this is, this thing's a whole new animal from the old LS Miata, and we're learning, we're adding stuff to our maintenance program every time, and I just slacked on aligning it. I didn't think we'd need to. I thought it would still be fine, and it was way off. But after fixing it, the car drove night and day better with the correct alignment settings. I mean, who would have thought? So between that and the clutch and all the other small improvements, I'm thinking this thing should feel pretty solid, especially being that we're going to a track that we know. So I'm excited. I'm excited for this comp. I'm excited for this weekend. I'm excited to go test it. But more importantly, I'm excited to go test the bus. This is gonna be our first trip in the new bus. Luckily, it's a local one, so we'll get to test it out and see what it feels like. Are you pumped?
I'm excited.
I'm pumped for bus driving.
Yep.
Working out of bus, having AC at the track.
See how that goes. It should be nice.
Right? It should be interesting. So yeah, we need to get this thing loaded in the bus, get everything else loaded, because nothing's really loaded in there, and get ready to go to the track tomorrow. Double testing, vet, bus. So I'm looking forward to that, but for now, that is gonna be a wrap. So I do wanna say thank you for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and then I sure hope we'll get to see you next time. Goodbye.